When someone says something to you, you can tune into the frequency of the pure intention the person had of what he says, and the intention and what the person actually says, okay? And if you find a huge gap in between the frequency level of intention and what the person says, okay? So it might be a very high frequency of intention and a very low frequency of what's actually came out from the intention. You know, hello, we got to investigate here. Something is actually not clean and okay here.
Welcome to this new episode, and today I have Andy Holm back. How are you, Andy?
Ciao Bello, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me down here in Chalakrom. I haven't been for a while, so good reason to come down and see you too, and sort of rediscover Chalakrom, really.
Why not?
It's been a while.
The Thai village in Copenhagen. So Andy is running a remote viewing group. And this, is a little bit esoteric, we can say, and it's quite interesting as well. So we're going to talk about remote viewing, right?
Let me grab one of the keywords you just mentioned, esoteric, and it is very esoteric. But as today esoteric matters provide, we do have a lot of science to go with it. And the remote viewing groups I'm doing are actually based on more than 20 years of research by the Stanford University, which was funded with $20 million in the 60s and 70s by the American government actually. So it's a step by step exploration of our most inert gifts nature gave us, which is based on the function of our pineal gland, also referred to as the third eye, which I'm actually not doing because I think it really misleads you energetically in the wrong direction. There is no third eye, there's the pineal gland. It's a bit more sort of ancient mythology, really, the third eye thing. If you look in any mythology, or even go back to Egypt, the Eye of Horus, right? It's actually our pineal gland. So I never refer to it really as the third eye, but the pineal gland. And this is what we're doing in the remote viewing groups. We're grabbing basically a lot of the 20 years of scientific exploration and the step-by-step program, how to work to get into the frequency matrix to actually recognize information received via our pineal gland.
Okay, and I know that many people were exposed to your teachings in the past. Lots of people in Copenhagen, etc. That's why I say, wow, this thing, is lots of people going. Certainly is, interesting. It's an interesting subject to learn. Particularly the pineal gland is something that I also learned when I was doing tantric yoga and also in India when I did my teacher training course with Shivananda.
That's why I started with it.
That's why you said the third eye. Yeah. And it's fascinating. Obviously, it's a gland that also, among other things, regulates melatonin production, and so it's very important for the sleep cycle, the circadian rhythm.
Melatonin, serotonin, the pineal gland is in charge of our sleeping patterns, right? So very important. But taking all those functions away over the decades and decades when technology came in, mobile phones were used, satellite were used, we of course lost more and more the ability to use our own gifts nature gave us to communicate. Today our communication is really with mobile phones, computers, and you name it. We don't really use the vast matrix of frequencies available to us in which we can tune in, because we are already a body of frequencies anyway. We are part of the big frequency matrix. I always say, we're not really learning anything today. What we're doing is we relearning to use those natural gifts nature provided us, because that's what we're really doing, because not using our pineal gland doesn't mean it's not active. The pineal gland is active at all times, as we just said, providing serotonin production and melatonin production and distribution, one of the major things. So it's active at all times, but the actual stimulation for us to bring us back into the matrix of frequency is something we have to relearn.
Yeah, it is interesting to me, the use of the pineal gland. I mean, you can read on the internet, there's lots of spiritual related information about the pineal gland. I was in Mysore in India and I went to a ashram there, and there was a teacher who was a highly developed Indian medical doctor and Ayurvedic doctor and a yogi of 40 years and more. And he did a pineal gland activation session, but we were lying down with eyes closed. And he had a very ancient sort of methodology. And he was talking about the pineal gland in particular with regards to spiritual development and the ability to feel, you know, something which is beyond the material, if you want, right? So there is lots of tradition around it. So it's quite
there's lots
fascinating.
of tradition about it. And just talking about actually the activation of this. So we actually next month we have a little jubileum. It's going to be our 30th remote viewing group here in Kopangan. The last one was about 3 weeks ago, which was a magic group. It was really a magic group, and we had also a beautiful energy because we had, let's say, rather young people from our community and the senior age people from our community. So we had just on the vibration field, we had such a beautiful combination of people and energy sitting there. And in the first part of the group, we're actually going into the actual scientific exploration of what we now call remote viewing. We're using the science from Stanford University. We're also learning how to use, which is part of the exploration, the technical exploration from Stanford University. We're going to learn how to use number codes to activate frequencies, which takes us right to the frequency source we are remote viewing. And then we have a little break, and then in the second part of the remote viewing afternoon, we're actually going to do, by using the tools we learned in the first part, we're actually going to do 4 actual remote viewings of sources, frequency sources, which could be 8,000 miles away from here. It could be Bangalore, somewhere in Massachusetts in the USA. None of us has ever seen, okay? And after each remote viewing, I actually come with a poster and reveal the actual source we remote view. And it was amazing. Like last group, we had about an average of we were 10 people. I always limited to 10 people because in the second part, many people haven't done the energetic work before, and it is very intense when you have 10 people / 10 pineal glands tuning into one frequency and activating that frequency. So I worked with 13, 14, 15 people before, but I noticed that in particular for people who for the very first time worked in the frequency matrix, it was really pretty strong sitting in a group of 15 pineal glands. So I cut it down to 10, which is a beautiful number, I think, and a beautiful energy to go with that. And this is what we're doing in a second part, then tuning all together into one specific frequency to activate it. By then we have also, and this is the major part, to relearn how to recognize information. And that's a big part. We're spending a bit of time on it in the remote viewing afternoons, to learn how to differ between projection, okay, and real information coming in, which means projection subconsciously arising from us, which we might believe this is actually information. In remote viewing, you call it analytical overlayers, AOLs. Okay, you might think you just received actually information, a visual information. In reality, without you noticing, it was just a memory on the same frequency popping up from 8, 60, 20, 40 years ago. Okay, but you might, if you don't learn how to differ between real information coming in and analytical overlayers subconsciously presenting itself, of course you're going to go into the absolute wrong direction. And it's a major thing to learn how to recognize information. And we got a few really very simple exercises to learn the difference between this is projection, and this is actually information. Scientifically speaking, quite interesting and dangerous too at the same moment is that they figured out the time frame, and we're talking seconds, right? The time frame between analytical overlay, subconscious is therefore projection, coming up of which you believe might be actually information coming in via the pineal gland, and the time frame of actually information coming in and becoming visible, being recognized, is actually the same time frame. So a projection takes the same time as a real information coming in, which of course is, when you start doing the work, is quite confusing in a way, right? So therefore we spend quite a bit of time to learn what's the difference between projection and real information coming in. And we do actually visual exercises to learn the difference between this is what projection looks like, this is what actually real information via the pineal gland comes in, and then translate it in your left brain. So our brain is still a part, the pineal gland is a part of our brain, but then again, it's not a part of our brain, but our brain works together with the pineal gland because all the information comes in on a frequency line, and then of course the frequency needs to be retranslated into the actual picture of the frequency source, which might be thousands of miles away. And that's the major thing and emphasis in the workshop, through exercises to relearn this is real information coming in, this is projection. Because we are constantly exposed to information coming in. The problem is we forgot how to recognize this is information here.
Andy, where did you learn the methodology? I mean, it looks like indeed you did lots of research, you're very interested in the subject, and you've been doing the remote viewing groups for a long time, but where did you learn the methodology to run these groups?
Okay, basically I started before. We've been on the island here now 5 years with my Australian wife, my daughter Mani Crystal, who is actually giving workshops in Sweden at the moment. Mm-hmm. And hopefully she'll be back here soon too. And basically about 15, 16 years ago, through a friend of mine who's much older than me, and who was basically indirectly involved into the program and actually also knew someone who was actually trained for remote viewing by the Americans back then. He basically put me onto the Stanford University. He had a lot of files left from the actual research. And once I started going into the research, I noticed, hey, the research runs very much parallel with my own experience in the psychic world, exploring the psychic world. One of the beautiful gifts is that you might be in the conversation, and once you're trained in remote viewing, you keep the training up in order to keep that part of your pineal gland to pick up on information and keep it active, is that you actually learn and you can actually pick up when someone says something to you. You can tune into the frequency of the pure intention the person had of what he says, and the intention and what the person actually says, okay? And if you find a huge gap in between the frequency level of intention and what the person says, okay? So it might be a very high frequency of intention and a very low frequency of what's actually came out from the intention. You know, hello, we got to investigate here. Something is actually not clean and okay here. Okay, and that's a very beautiful gift to tune into the real intention of what a person says to you and what does he really mean with what he says, you know. I worked that very hard in the remote viewing groups too, because it's one of the major benefits and gifts. Also later on in personal life, when you live in communes and you name it, to basically, to say quite blunt, to cut out personal bullshit and detect what's really going on. So one major gift.
Yeah, it goes back to what you're saying, the projection, etc. You know, because it's very difficult to see sometimes if the idea I have of you saying something is actually information coming from you. So your intention, your words, your body language, your intonation, etc. or if it's just me projecting on you something that I perceive you to be. It's very, very difficult. And when you talk about intuition as well, I believe some people are more intuitive naturally, and some people have almost a gift of intuition, and they're very much in tune with the frequency, as you say, or the vibration of the environment. While some others, for me, I had to train this aspect of myself, a little bit more.
Everyone does. Don't get me wrong. Everyone does. Okay, I had to train for years. Doing basically, my wife always used to basically be my trainer. She would come with remote viewing exercises, right? And through that training, you more and more open up, you more and more stimulate really. Just quickly back to what we just talked about, the intention and what's been actually said. You also got to keep in mind, not to excuse people who work in that sort of dicey field, but very often you also find that the intention of the person is actually a very subconscious intention, which might go back to trauma, which might go as far as body memory stored trauma. Okay, so the person might not even be conscious about that. His actual intention is so subconsciously seeded that he doesn't even know, hang on, my intention and what I'm telling you are actually two very different things,
It's very common. Like, I mean, what I think, what I say, and what I do very often are three different things. Hey. That's human beings in a way, unless you're a highly developed human being. But and also there is such a thing as a cultural framework and a social game that, without being unauthentic, but it's a social game that you have to kind of comply with if you want to be socially successful, right? So there is genuinity and authenticity that needs to be there to a certain extent, but then you can kind of smooth the way you communicate to people to make it a little bit softer, a little bit more culturally relevant.
Absolutely.
So in Thailand, for instance, you say, the way you speak to a certain person or another, if you are intelligent, emotionally intelligent, is different, right?
Yeah, the benefit is really, it all goes back to truth. If you want to use that word, but that's a really good word to use at the moment too, because it's really out there, truth. So let's stay on the truth. That's the advantage here, as we said, intention and real action, or what's really been said. Okay, what's the truth within that, and then you can direct yourself within that truth. Oh, do I want to run about with the intention, or what's been said, or where would I like to position myself to be in a clear, also safe and overlooking space to actually see what's really happening, And it's not only that, one of the major things also within the remote viewing training is that all major decisions, basically, all my major decisions I'm always doing within the frame of remote viewing. I just wait for the information coming in. Information coming in like this, right? It's really not even, I reckon at times it's not even a second, it's a split seconds. And when I observe in our remote viewing groups, when I observe the people, I can actually pick up when information actually kicks in. And you actually see a physical reaction too in people. And you also see that, wow, it might be just 1 or 2 seconds that they actually grabbed the image that came in, right? And that's the major thing, as I said before, to relearn the recognition of information. And it's a very split seconds. You will not get a 4 or 5 minute sequence of something you remote view, right? You can always go back and the picture opens more and more up and you recapture the actual frequency source of what you remote view, but you always have to go back, like you would be a very enlightened person if you can hold such an image for minutes and minutes, and as you probably might confirm, I never met an enlightened person.
Not yet, maybe.
So there is, there's a lot to learn, and I've been doing this, I've been involved in spirituality now really since, I'm 63 years old now, so let's say I started my journey 45 years ago, and wow, how much more is there to be learned, how much more is there to be learned, it's amazing. Because it's also connected to, all sorts of different areas. As you said, the intellect, emotional intelligence, the cosmic area, as such, you know. We all, that's the major thing we have to learn. We all, and this goes back to the remote viewing too, we are all living in a matrix of frequencies.
Sure.
Everything is connected. As I'm connected to you now on a frequency level, I'm still connected to the white lamp that shines a bit of bright light onto us, okay? But I'm not actively connected, okay?
No.
If Johnny would sit there, in a moment, I'd be still connected to Johnny, actively connected now to you. At the moment, I draw the energy into Johnny. We are now actively connected, but we are within the matrix. We are all at all times still connected.
In Tantric Yoga, it's called the principle of resonance. Everything emits and receives vibration. So colors, sounds, shapes, everything, you know, has an impact on our nervous system at the end.
The Tantra education is very, very close in its principles to what we're doing in the groups, actually, because again, as you just said, it runs on the base of everything is connected in frequency. So at the poster I'm showing of the frequency source, they receive the information, and there's sometimes people in the early 20s, they've never done anything like it, and they just go, it's sort of like, oh my God, it's all true.
And it's not a magician stunt, yeah?
It's
because, you know, if you're a good magician, you can do all sorts of tricks.
It's certainly not a magician stunt, because, you know, you would need 10 highly trained magicians to achieve that, you know.
Well, thank you very much again, okay? So I see you on the island. Andy's always here, you know, very much a presence in Copenhagen.
Thank you too.